This is my true story. I built a home with my hands, a place I thought would always be my shelter. I gave it to my son, thinking I would always have love and dignity under that roof. But one night, he gave my bedroom to his father-in-law and pushed me into the cold kitchen floor. I lay there in silence, broken, staring at the ceiling of the house I built. But I still held one secret power he had forgotten. What I did next changed everything. Before I tell you, write where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories. I spent my whole life carrying one dream inside me, that my son would never know the kind of struggle I once lived through. When I was young, I slept on cold floors, I worked long days, and I ate meals that barely filled me. I told myself that my child would never feel that weight. Every step I took, every job I accepted, every sacrifice I made was guided by that one thought. I wanted to give him a foundation so strong that he could stand on it without fear of falling. That dream became the reason I woke up before the sun and came home after it was gone. The house was the center of that dream. I saw it in my mind before it ever stood on the ground. I saw a roof that would keep out the rain, walls that would never collapse, and rooms filled with warmth and safety. For years, I carried that vision like a lantern in the dark. Each paycheck that passed through my hands was split between survival and saving. I denied myself small joys because I wanted something bigger for him. When friends bought new clothes, I wore the old ones. When others spent on celebrations, I saved in silence. My hands grew calloused, my back bent with years of lifting and building, but I kept pushing. The day I finally held the keys, I felt pride that no words could describe. The mortgage was heavy, but it was mine to carry. I worked double shifts to meet every payment. When repairs came, I fixed them myself. When the roof leaked, I climbed up with my own tools. When the walls cracked, I sealed them with my own hands. Each repair carried my sweat. Each improvement carried my blood. That house was not just built of bricks. It was built of years of sacrifice and quiet determination. When I finished paying off the mortgage, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The house was free, and so was I. I renovated it again, painted it, replaced old wood, fixed broken corners, and made sure it would last not just for me, but for him. I thought of his future, his wife, his children. I wanted him to have a place where laughter could grow, where memories could be safe. When the work was done, I handed it to him. I gave it not with fear, not with doubt, but with joy. Because I believed that giving it to him meant giving myself peace. When I handed over the home, I did not keep a lock or a key to myself. I told him this was his, and I meant it with all my heart. I believed that in return, I would always have a place under that roof. Not because of ownership, not because of law, but because of love. I thought that no matter what happened, my son would never let me feel unwanted in the home that carried my sacrifice. I believed that the blood I poured into the ground of that property would protect me forever. But sacrifice is not always remembered. Sometimes the years you give become invisible to those who benefit from them. They walk across the floor you built and never think of the man who laid each tile. They sleep under the roof you repaired and never think of the nights you worked with bleeding hands to make sure it stayed strong. That is the cruelty of sacrifice. It is silent, it asks for nothing, and because it asks for nothing, it is often forgotten. I believed my son would be different. I believed he would see me not as a burden, but as the reason he never had to carry one. That belief was my comfort as I grew older. I told myself, no matter how tired I become, no matter how weak my body grows, I will always have dignity under that roof. I thought the house was more than wood and stone. I thought it was a promise carved into the earth. But promises can break, even the ones you build with your own hands. At first, I told myself everything was fine. When my son and his wife moved into the house, I heard new sounds within those walls. The laughter of children, the footsteps of family, the warmth of meals being cooked in the kitchen. It made me feel alive. I thought my sacrifice had been worth it, because the house was not empty. It was breathing, filled with the life I once dreamed of for my son. In those first days, I walked the halls with quiet pride, believing that all I had worked for had finally bloomed into something beautiful. But over time, something changed. It was small at first, so small that I almost ignored it. The way my son would listen more to his wife's family than to me. The way my advice, once trusted, was brushed aside with a nod and forgotten. The way decisions in the house were made without me, even though every brick in those walls carried my sweat. I was no longer the man who held the center. I was becoming a shadow that lived in the background. When his wife's family visited, I felt it most. They walked through the doors like they belonged more than I did. Their voices carried louder, their presence weighed heavier. My son laughed with them, leaned toward them, and sought their approval more than mine. I sat quietly in the corner, watching the loyalty I thought would always be mine drift toward others. I told myself it was natural, that when a man marries, his wife's family becomes his family too. I tried to accept it. I tried to silence the ache in my chest by saying, "This is just how life works." But silence does not erase truth. The truth was that every time he dismissed me, every time he looked past me, the bond between us cracked. Small pieces of trust fell away. He no longer looked at me with the respect of a son. He looked at me as if I were old, as if my words no longer carried weight. It hurt, but I swallowed the hurt like medicine, bitter and heavy. I told myself family peace was more important than my pride. I said to myself that love meant sacrifice, and if that sacrifice was my voice, then so be it. I kept my seat at the edge of the room. I smiled when I did not feel like smiling, and I convinced myself that the cracks would heal if I just stayed quiet. But cracks do not heal on their own. They grow, they spread, and soon they begin to break what once stood strong. One evening, I saw it clearly. My son stood beside his wife's father, speaking with a kind of respect I had not felt from him in years. His eyes lit up when he spoke to that man. His posture bent toward him, as if he were the true elder in the house. I stood behind them, unnoticed, invisible. In that moment, I understood the truth I had been running from. My son no longer saw me as the foundation of his life. He saw me as something that could be replaced. That realization broke something inside me. Because a house is not destroyed by one blow. It falls when cracks are ignored, when walls are weakened over time. My bond with my son was no different. I had ignored the signs, I had told myself to stay silent, but the silence did not protect me. It only made me invisible in the house I built. The first cracks had already spread too far, and I knew that one day those cracks would not just hurt me. They would bring the entire foundation crashing down. The night that broke me came without warning. It was an ordinary evening, quiet in the house I had built, when my son decided to erase my dignity with a single decision. He told me that my bedroom, the room where I had slept for years, the room I had built with my own hands, the room that carried the weight of my life's work, was no longer mine. He had given it away to his wife's father, a man who had not laid a single brick in that home, a man who had not carried the debt, who had not worked double shifts, who had not sacrificed a single breath for it. That man was now placed above me, inside the very walls of my sacrifice. The words cut through me deeper than any blade could. My bedroom was not just a space with a bed. It was the last corner of that house where I still felt I belonged. It was the place where I could close my eyes and feel safe. The place that reminded me that even as I grew old, I still had dignity under my roof. Stripping it from me was not just a command. It was humiliation. It was a message that I no longer mattered. He did not stop there. He told me where I would go, not to another room, not to a guest bed, but to the kitchen floor. Cold tiles, no pillow, no mattress. Just a thin blanket tossed on the ground as if I were an animal that needed only a corner to rest in. That was the place my son decided was good enough for me. That was how he measured the worth of his father. That night, I walked into the kitchen slowly, my heart heavy, my steps weak. I lay down on the floor, the blanket scratching against my skin. The chill from the tiles crawled into my bones, and no amount of shifting could soften it. I closed my eyes, but the image of another man sleeping in my bed burned into me. A man who had given nothing now rested where I once rested, while I lay on the ground, like a beggar in the house I had built. I stared at the ceiling, the same ceiling I had painted with my own hands years ago. I remembered the nights when the roof leaked and I had climbed up with a hammer, sealing it so my son would stay dry. I remembered the years when I skipped meals to pay the mortgage so this house would never be taken. Now, lying on that kitchen floor, those memories stabbed at me like knives. All my sacrifices mocked me in silence. The house that once gave me pride now pressed down on me like a cage. The humiliation was not only in where I slept, it was in the silence of the house. No one came to ask if I was warm enough. No one cared if I was comfortable. I was invisible, lying in the heart of the home I created. My son laughed in the other room with his wife's father, while I swallowed tears in the dark. Each laugh that echoed through the walls cut deeper. Each sound reminded me of how far I had fallen. That night, I understood what it meant to be erased while still breathing. I was not dead, but I was treated as if I had already vanished. My role as a father was stripped away. My place as a man was destroyed. I was reduced to an old shadow on a kitchen floor. The humiliation was not just about space, it was about worth. My son had measured my worth and found it less than a man who had done nothing for him. Lying there, I felt shame burn hotter than the cold under me. Shame that I had given my life for a child who now saw me as less than nothing. Shame that I had believed sacrifice would protect me. Shame that I had thought love was strong enough to survive pride and arrogance. That night, I realized I had lost more than a room. I had lost the respect of my own blood. And once respect is gone, everything else follows. The humiliation of that night will never leave me. It carved itself into my bones. But in that deep humiliation, something else began to stir. Something quiet. Something strong. Because even as I lay on that cold floor, I remembered one thing my son had forgotten. The house was not his. And that truth, buried beneath my shame, was waiting to rise. That night on the kitchen floor was the longest of my life. The tiles beneath me were like ice, pressing into my bones until every joint ached. The blanket was thin, offering no warmth, only a cruel reminder that I had been pushed down to the lowest place in my own home. My body trembled, but the cold was not the worst part. The true pain was inside me, in the silence of my heart. I did not cry out. I did not argue. I did not ask for better. I lay there in quiet, broken and unseen. As I stared into the dark ceiling, memories came rushing back to me. I saw myself as a younger man, carrying bricks, pouring cement, working in the sun until my skin burned, all to make sure this house would stand tall. I saw the nights I came home from work too tired to eat, but still found strength to fix a leaking pipe or patch a broken wall. I remembered the winter days when my hands cracked from the cold because I chose to pay the heating bill instead of buying gloves for myself. Every sacrifice I made had been for this house, for this family, for my son. And now, in return, I was lying on a hard floor while another man slept in my bed. My mind replayed the moments when I believed this home would protect me. I had thought it would be my shield in old age, that its walls would carry respect within them. But now those same walls echoed with my humiliation. My sacrifice, once a source of pride, turned into a cruel weight pressing against me. I felt like a stranger under the roof that bore my name, a ghost in a place I had built with living hands. The pain was quiet, but it was sharp. It was the kind of pain that does not leave bruises but instead digs into the soul. My son did not see it, did not hear it, but I carried it like chains around my chest. I remembered the years I had placed his needs above mine. I gave him shoes when I walked in worn ones. I gave him food when I went hungry. I gave him chances in life I never had. And now he gave me a place on the kitchen floor, as if all of that had been worthless. I wanted to tell myself that I still mattered, that somewhere in his heart he still respected me. But the silence of that night told me otherwise. No footsteps came to check on me. No voice whispered to ask if I was all right. They laughed in the other rooms while I lay in the dark, my body curled for warmth, my dignity stripped away. I was invisible in my own home. That silence cut deeper than any words could. Because in that silence, I realized the truth. I was no longer seen as a father, no longer seen as the man who gave everything. I was seen only as an old burden, someone who could be moved aside when it was convenient. The kitchen floor became more than a place to sleep. It became the symbol of how far I had fallen in his eyes. But even as I lay there in pain, something began to shift inside me. The humiliation broke me, yes, but beneath the cracks of that brokenness, a fire began to grow. A fire I did not show. A fire I kept hidden in silence, because the one thing my son had forgotten was that the house still carried my name. That night of silent pain planted a seed of strength, a seed of revenge. I closed my eyes, the cold still pressing into me, but my thoughts had changed. I was no longer just an old man lying on the floor. I was the man who built that house, the man who still held the deed, the man who could take everything back with one decision. And though my son thought he had won by humiliating me, he had unknowingly awakened the very strength that would end his comfort. That night of silent pain became the night of my awakening. It was the moment I stopped being only a victim and began preparing to reclaim my dignity. As I lay there on the kitchen floor, shivering through the night, a thought returned to me like a quiet whisper. My son believed he owned the house completely. He believed that because I had given him the keys, the rooms, and the freedom to call it his, the house was truly his forever. He thought I had handed away everything, that I had no more power left, no more voice, no more claim. But he had forgotten something. A truth buried in paper and ink. A truth stronger than his arrogance. The deed was still in my name. For years, I had kept it that way. Not because I did not trust him, but because I thought there was no need to rush. The house was his in spirit, in practice, in love. I let him live there, rule there, make decisions as if he were the full owner. I never reminded him of the deed, I never spoke of the title, because I wanted him to feel strong, to feel that the house was his. I thought silence was an act of love. I thought letting him feel powerful was part of being a father. But lying there on the cold kitchen floor, I realized how blind my love had been. The silence that once protected him now became my weapon. While he mocked me, while he gave my bedroom to another man, while he pushed me into the dirt of my own home, he never stopped to remember whose name was written on the very paper that defined ownership. He never asked who the law would listen to if the house was questioned. He never imagined that the man on the kitchen floor was still the true owner of every wall, every roof tile, every brick. The thought gave me a strength I had forgotten I still carried. I was not as powerless as he wanted me to believe. Yes, he had taken my pride that night. Yes, he had stripped away my dignity, but he had not taken my authority. Hidden beneath years of trust was a simple truth. The house was never his. It was always mine. I remembered the day I signed those papers. I had stood with the lawyer, my hands shaking from years of hard work, and placed my name on the deed. That name had never been erased. It had never been replaced. It was still mine. No matter how loudly my son claimed the house was his, no matter how boldly he gave away my room, the truth was unshaken. The law did not see him as the owner. The law still saw me. This realization burned like a quiet fire in my chest. It reminded me that humiliation does not always end in defeat. Sometimes humiliation plants the seed of justice. My son thought I was too weak, too old, too broken to fight back. He thought my silence meant surrender. But my silence was only patience, and patience can become power when the time is right. I thought of the man sleeping in my bed, snoring peacefully while I lay on the hard floor. I thought of my son laughing in the next room, proud of himself for pushing me aside. They both believed I had nothing left. But what they did not see was the truth written in black ink on white paper, folded and hidden, waiting for the day it would speak louder than any of their voices. I closed my eyes on the cold tiles and repeated that truth to myself, like a prayer. The house is mine. The walls are mine. The roof is mine. They can laugh. They can mock. They can humiliate. But the foundation they stand on is still mine. The more I thought about it, the more the cold seemed to fade. The pain in my bones did not feel as heavy. Because I understood something that changed everything. My son had forgotten the most important rule of power. It does not matter who controls the room if they do not own the ground beneath it. And I, the man lying in silence, still owned the ground. That night ended with a new strength inside me. I rose from the floor not as a victim, but as the silent owner of the house that my son thought belonged to him. He had taken away my dignity, but soon I would take away everything he thought was his. That night on the kitchen floor was not only about humiliation, it was also about awakening. For the first time, I saw clearly what had to be done. My son believed I was powerless, but the truth was still in my hands. I could no longer live like a ghost in the house I had built. I could no longer allow myself to be erased while still breathing. The moment had come to make a choice. Either I would continue suffering in silence, or I would reclaim my dignity with the only power left to me. That night, I made the decision. The decision was not born out of anger. It was born out of necessity. Anger fades, but humiliation burns until something is done to heal it. I understood that my silence had allowed my son to grow arrogant. He thought he could take my bedroom, push me aside, and still keep everything. He thought my sacrifices gave him endless rights, that my love meant I would never fight back. He was wrong. Love does not mean surrender. Sacrifice does not mean blindness. Respect is not free. It must be protected. As I lay there, staring into the dark, I told myself that this humiliation was the last I would ever accept. If my son believed the kitchen floor was where I belonged, then I would make sure he learned what it felt like to have no roof at all. If he thought I was nothing, then I would show him how quickly everything he depended on could vanish. The decision was clear. I would take back the house, not with noise, not with shouting, but with silence and law. I thought of all the years I had carried him, the shoes I bought when my own shoes were torn, the meals I gave him when I went hungry, the warmth I gave him in winters when I froze. Every sacrifice I made had been for him, and yet, in the end, he reduced me to a shadow on a cold floor. That thought hardened my resolve. If he could forget my sacrifices so easily, then I could just as easily remind him who held the true power. The decision grew stronger with every breath. I realized that dignity is not something anyone can give you. Dignity is something you must defend. I had allowed mine to be stripped away because I believed silence was the best path. But silence had only given others the chance to trample me. It was time for silence to become my weapon instead of my weakness. I did not imagine shouting at him. I did not imagine confronting him with words. My revenge would not be in anger. It would be in control. It would be an action so quiet and sharp that he would never see it coming. A decision written in ink, sealed by law, and impossible to reverse. That night, as the hours passed, I felt my heart harden like stone. I understood that sometimes, to protect your dignity, you must take back everything. My son had taken my bed, my pride, my peace. In return, I would take his entire house. The home he believed was his would vanish beneath him. The walls he thought were his protection would belong to someone else. And when he finally realized it, he would understand the pain of losing everything. The decision gave me strength. I no longer felt only like an old man lying on the floor. I felt like the true owner rising again. He had mocked me for being powerless, but he had forgotten that the pen in my hand could destroy his comfort more than any argument ever could. And so, I decided, I would not wait. I would not beg. I would act. The house would no longer be his, and when the day came, he would learn that the father he tried to erase was still the master of his fate. That was my vow, my silent promise to myself, and once that decision took root, there was no turning back. The next morning, I did not rise as the broken man who had slept on the kitchen floor. I rose as the owner of the house, carrying a decision carved deep into my heart. My body was stiff, my bones ached, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep, but my mind was sharp. I walked through the halls of the home I built, looking at every wall, every corner, every brick. They no longer felt like a prison. They felt like weapons, because each one carried my name, not his. My son thought he had erased me, but the truth was that I was about to erase him. I left the house quietly. No words, no explanations. I did not tell him where I was going, and he did not ask, because he no longer cared about my steps. That was his mistake. Silence is dangerous when it hides purpose, and my silence was about to strike harder than any words ever could. I went straight to my lawyer, the man who had helped me years ago when I signed the deed. He looked at me with surprise when I told him what happened, but surprise quickly turned to focus when I laid the truth before him. The papers were still in my name. My son had no legal right to the property. The humiliation I had suffered was not just cruel, it was also blind. He had mocked the one man who still held all the power. The lawyer opened the old files, spread the papers across the desk, and pointed to the line where my name stood in black ink. That name had never been erased. That line of ownership was still mine. It felt like a spark of life entered me again when I saw it. Proof. Not just in memory, not just in sacrifice, but in law. The house was mine, and mine alone. We began the process immediately. I signed the forms with steady hands, though inside me a storm of emotion roared. With every stroke of the pen, I felt dignity return to me. Each line of ink was a reminder that I was not powerless. I was not forgotten. I was not erased. The humiliation of the kitchen floor was turning into the justice of legal papers. Within days, the sale was arranged. Buyers came forward, drawn to the home I had built so strong, so beautiful. They saw value in it, and they were ready to take it. I did not hesitate. My son had turned my gift into my shame, but now I was turning his comfort into my weapon. The house he claimed, the house he ruled, the house he filled with arrogance. It would be sold out from under him. When the final papers were signed, I felt something I had not felt in years. Power. The money was transferred into my account. Safe, untouchable, mine. No one could take it from me. The home that once chained me to humiliation was now the tool of my freedom. My son did not know. He did not see it coming. While he laughed in his pride, believing he had defeated me, I had already taken everything from him in silence. I walked away from the lawyer's office with a calm face. No one around me knew what I had just done. No one could see the war that had been fought in silence and won with ink. I did not shout my victory. I did not boast. Revenge does not need noise. It needs finality. And finality was exactly what I carried with me. The house was no longer his. It was no longer mine either. It now belonged to strangers who valued it more than he ever did. The deed had spoken. The law had answered. And my son, the man who had forced me to the kitchen floor, had just lost everything without even realizing it. That was the execution of my decision. Clean, silent, complete. And it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth. The day of truth arrived like a storm he never saw coming. My son walked into the house, carrying himself with the same arrogance that had humiliated me days earlier. But this time, the house no longer belonged to him. Strangers were already inside, moving through the rooms with purpose. Furniture was being shifted, boxes stacked, belongings carried out. The noise of change echoed through the walls, louder than any argument could ever be. My son froze in the doorway, confusion twisting into shock. His eyes darted from room to room as if the home itself had betrayed him. He demanded answers, but no one looked to him as the authority. The buyers had their papers. The movers had their instructions. His voice, once heavy with control, now carried no weight. He shouted, but the walls no longer listened. He tried to claim ownership, but the law had already spoken. His name was not on the deed. His voice was powerless against the truth written in ink. He could rage, he could scream, but nothing could undo the signatures that had sealed his fate. For years, he believed the house was his fortress. He strutted through its halls as if he were king, forgetting the man who built it. He gave away my bedroom like it was his to give, forgetting that the real owner was lying on the kitchen floor. Now, with strangers walking across those same halls, he saw the truth. He was never the king. He was only a guest living on borrowed ground. His face burned with fury, but underneath the fury was fear. Fear that the life he thought was permanent had been erased in a single stroke. Fear that the comfort he mocked me with had been pulled out from under him. He looked at the strangers with disbelief, as if he could command them to stop. But they did not stop. They carried on, removing what he thought was his, piece by piece, until the house no longer looked like his home, but like a shell being emptied. He turned to his wife, but she had no answers. He turned to her father, but the man who once enjoyed my bedroom had no power to protect him now. They stood together, helpless, watching as everything slipped away. Pride had blinded them, arrogance had made them cruel, and now reality was breaking them apart. They had no law on their side. They had no papers to hold. They had nothing but their voices, and voices cannot fight ink. For me, watching from the distance, the scene was not filled with joy, but with justice. It was not laughter I felt. It was closure. Because the same man who had thrown me onto the kitchen floor now stood in the doorway of a house that no longer belonged to him. The humiliation he gave me had come back, multiplied, heavier, sharper. He thought I was powerless, but now he was the powerless one. The neighbors soon noticed. Whispers spread. People who once saw him as the proud owner now saw him as a man losing everything in plain sight. The shame he tried to bury me under now rose around him. The humiliation he thought he had hidden inside me now stood on his shoulders for all to see. The fallout was not only legal, it was social. His pride, his image, his reputation, all of it cracked in front of the world. That day, I did not need to speak a word to him. The house itself spoke for me. The movers, the buyers, the papers, the strangers. They were my voice. Every box lifted, every item removed, was my silent answer to the humiliation he had given me. I had been invisible in that home, but now he was invisible in the law. The fallout was complete. His anger could not undo it. His pride could not stop it. His family's cries could not reverse it. The foundation he thought was his had been ripped away. He had nothing left to stand on but the truth. The father he tried to erase had just erased him instead. When the final papers were signed and the strangers claimed the keys, the house that once carried my humiliation was no longer tied to my name or my pain. My son, who had laughed at my weakness, now stood outside with nothing. The man he placed above me, his wife's father, who once stretched himself in comfort on my bed, was forced out too. The same walls that had sheltered their arrogance now closed against them. The same roof that had once echoed with their voices now belonged to others. The arrogance that filled their hearts shattered in a single moment. They scrambled, searching for answers, looking for places to go. Their pride, once high, could not hide the fear that now covered their faces. The bed that was once mine, the bed they took from me, was no longer theirs to rest in. Their laughter died into silence. Their comfort turned into panic. They carried their belongings in shame, dragging bags out of the house, looking smaller with each step. The neighbors watched. Some whispered, some stared, but all of them saw the truth. The proud family that mocked their elder now had no home. I did not stand near them. I did not argue, did not gloat, did not speak. Justice needs no words. I had already spoken through my actions. The law had already answered for me. They were living the punishment of their own cruelty. I had been forced to the kitchen floor, but now they had no floor at all. I had been stripped of my dignity, but now they had been stripped of their security. What they gave me in humiliation, I returned in silence. The house, once the symbol of my sacrifice, was gone from all of us. But unlike them, I did not lose. I gained freedom. They lost everything because they tried to take from me what was not theirs to take. The house turned against them, not by magic, but by truth. They learned too late that a gift is not a toy to mock, that respect cannot be erased without consequence. They had gambled my dignity, thinking I was powerless, but the debt was returned in full. The aftermath was harsh for them. No longer did they walk proudly in halls they thought were theirs. No longer did they place their guests in bedrooms they believed they owned. They stood on the street with nowhere to go, facing a reality they had never imagined. Their pride melted into fear, their arrogance into regret, their laughter into silence. My son's voice, once sharp and commanding, now shook with desperation. His wife's father, once so bold in taking my space, now lowered his eyes, unable to face the shame of being thrown out like an intruder. And me? I walked away quietly, without looking back. For years, that house had chained me to pain. But now, I had broken the chain. I no longer carried the humiliation of the kitchen floor. I carried only the strength of knowing I had acted, that I had restored my dignity, that I had taken back control. My silence had turned into justice, and my justice had turned into peace. The aftermath was not just about them losing the house, it was about me reclaiming my worth. They had tried to erase me, but in the end, they erased themselves. Their downfall was not born from my cruelty, but from their own blindness. They forgot who built the foundation they stood on. They forgot who carried the weight of their comfort. And when they forgot, they lost it all. That is what the aftermath of betrayal looks like. Silence turning into strength, humiliation turning into justice, and arrogance turning into ashes. With the money safe in my account and the house gone from their hands forever, I did not stay to watch the rest. I did not wait for their anger, their excuses, their cries. I had no need for more words. My justice was complete. I left quietly, without leaving an address, without leaving a trace. I vanished from their lives like a shadow slipping out of the door. For years, they had treated me as if I did not belong, as if I was already gone. Now I gave them exactly what they wanted, my absence. But I left them without the roof they once mocked me under. I found myself a new place, small but peaceful, where every corner belonged to me. It was not grand, it was not filled with riches, but it was mine, truly mine. When I lay on the bed that first night, I felt something I had not felt in years: dignity. No one could take that bed from me. No one could tell me to sleep on the floor. No one could treat me as if I was invisible. The silence in that new home was not the silence of humiliation. It was the silence of peace. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes justice is a quiet act that changes everything. My son thought he had broken me when he sent me to the kitchen floor. He thought I would stay there until the end of my days, weak and forgotten. But he forgot the truth. The man who builds the foundation always holds the final power. He gave away my bed, but I gave away his entire house. He took my dignity, but I took his comfort. He erased me in his pride, but I erased him in my silence. People ask if I regret it. If I regret selling the house, if I regret leaving him with nothing. But regret is for those who had a choice between right and wrong. I did not. I had been stripped, humiliated, mocked, erased. My only choice was to rise or remain broken. And I chose to rise, not with anger, not with revenge shouted from rooftops, but with justice carried in quiet strength. In the end, my justice was simple. I gave back to him what he gave to me. He gave me shame. I gave him loss. He gave me humiliation. I gave him emptiness. He gave me the kitchen floor. I gave him the street. And then I walked away, free of his chains, free of his cruelty, free of the house that had once become my prison. I live now with peace. I breathe without the weight of humiliation pressing on my chest. I eat in silence, but it is a silence filled with dignity, not shame. I sleep in my bed, not on a cold floor. I do not need their voices, their company, their false respect. I have my freedom, and freedom is worth more than any roof shared with arrogance. This is my story, the story of a father who gave everything and was repaid with betrayal. The story of a man who was humiliated in his own home, but who found the strength to take back his dignity. My son thought he had defeated me, but in the end, he only defeated himself. Final thought: he gave my bed away, I gave his home away, and then I vanished.